A Porsche 911 GT3 RS rolled off an auction block for a fraction of what it should have cost. The paint was flawless. The interior looked untouched. And yet the car wouldn't start, the factory wouldn't touch it, and its own manufacturer had quietly frozen it out of the dealer network forever. This is the story of how one YouTube mechanic bought a six-figure supercar that Porsche itself had given up on, and what he found when he finally cracked it open. The Porsche 911 GT3 RS occupies rarefied air in the sports car world. It's the naturally aspirated track-honed halo model that sits above even the standard GT3, built for drivers who care more about lap times than luxury. Cars like this typically hold their value with almost stubborn consistency. Depreciation is something that happens to other cars, not to a GT3 RS. So when a 991 generation GT3 RS, finished in the brand's iconic speed yellow, showed up at auction, it caught the attention of automotive YouTuber Matt Armstrong. Armstrong had already built a reputation for taking on cars that big manufacturers had walked away from, most notably a Bugatti Veyron that the French marque had effectively refused to service. This GT3 RS looked like a continuation of that pattern, except this time, the car in question came with a far murkier backstory. Armstrong ended up winning the car for roughly £87,000, which converts to somewhere in the neighborhood of $116,000 to $168,000 depending on the exchange rate used and the site reporting it. Either way, it was a steep discount from the £150,000 plus these cars typically command in good running order. For a car this rare, that kind of gap is either the deal of a lifetime or a very expensive warning sign. Armstrong has said the previous owner's finance agreement had lapsed, and the bank stepped in to repossess the vehicle before it ever reached auction. That detail alone told him this wasn't a simple case of someone falling on hard times. Somewhere between the original buyer taking delivery and the repossession, something had gone badly wrong, badly enough that the owner apparently decided it wasn't worth fighting for. When the GT3 RS arrived at Armstrong's workshop, the first walk-around only deepened the mystery. This wasn't a wrecked track car with stone chips and a cracked splitter. The bodywork was clean. There was no sign of accident damage, no obvious abuse, nothing that screamed, "This car has a problem." If anything, it looked like a car that had spent most of its life being polished rather than driven hard. Then Armstrong got in and turned the key. Nothing happened. No crank, no dash lights, no life at all. A car that should have been worth well over £150,000 sat completely inert, as dead electrically as it was mechanically. For a modern GT3 RS, a car built around one of the most celebrated naturally aspirated flat-six engines Porsche has ever produced, that kind of total silence is unusual. Something more than a flat battery was going on here. The deeper Armstrong dug into the car's paperwork, the stranger things got. According to his own account of the story, Porsche had effectively refused to repair the car under warranty, and the automaker suspected the engine's internal wear didn't line up with the mileage shown on the odometer. In plain terms, Porsche believed the numbers on the dashboard didn't match the number of miles the engine had actually turned, and that mismatch was enough for the factory to wash its hands of the car entirely. To understand why this particular claim was so loaded, it helps to know a little about the engine sitting behind the seats. The 991.1 generation GT3 and GT3 RS use a 4.0-liter naturally aspirated flat-six that revs to a genuinely thrilling 9,000 revolutions per minute redline, a genuine rarity in an era when most performance engines had already gone turbocharged. Enthusiast forums and independent Porsche specialists have documented a known valve train wear issue affecting these engines, centered on the finger followers, small rocker arm-style components that translate camshaft motion into valve movement. Over time and mileage, some owners have reported abnormal wear on these components and on the camshaft lobes themselves, occasionally accompanied by a ticking noise and, in more severe cases, a check engine light or reduced running. This is a well-known enough pattern in the Porsche community that owners on forums such as Renlist have compared borescope images of their own engines to check for early signs of lifter and cam lobe wear. It's the kind of issue that, if it affects your car, you want caught by a factory warranty rather than paid for out of pocket, because a full engine strip down on a car like this is not a cheap job. That's precisely why Porsche's refusal to help felt so jarring at first glance. If this GT3 RS was suffering from a recognized wear pattern in a widely discussed part of the engine, why wouldn't the brand simply fix it under warranty like it presumably would for other owners? The answer, as Armstrong would eventually piece together, had less to do with the mechanical fault itself and more to do with what the car's data logs were saying. Rather than accept Porsche's decision as the final word, Armstrong decided to find out for himself exactly what was wrong and whether the car was as far gone as its paperwork suggested. That meant pulling the engine. Removing a modern flat-six from a 911 is not a quick afternoon job. The engine sits low and far back in the chassis, tangled up with subframe components, cooling lines, wiring looms, and suspension hardware that all have to be carefully disconnected and labeled before the power plant can be lowered out. It's the kind of job that eats entire days even for an experienced crew, and every connector left unlabeled is a headache waiting to happen during reassembly. Before they even got that far, though, the team found small details that hinted at how the car had been treated in the months leading up to the auction. A sump plug was found loose rather than properly torqued down, which had likely allowed engine oil to seep out over time. The coolant reservoir was also found essentially empty. A missing fuel pump fuse turned up, not in the fuse box where it belonged, but sitting loose in the cabin, which alone would explain why the fuel system had no power and the car wouldn't start. Taken together, it looked less like a car that had suffered a catastrophic failure and more like a vehicle that had been partially disassembled during a warranty investigation, then hastily reassembled and pushed out the door once that investigation stalled. That theory lines up with what typically happens when a dealership begins a warranty claim only to have it rejected midway through. Technicians open the car up, start the diagnostic process, and then stop the moment they're told the claim won't be honored, because from that point on, the labor isn't being paid for by the manufacturer. Once the engine was out and opened up, the picture became clearer, and in some ways more reassuring than expected. The cylinder bores and pistons were reported to be in good condition, without the kind of scoring or heat damage you'd expect if the engine had genuinely run dry or seized on track. That was the good news. The bad news was inside the valve train. Armstrong's inspection reportedly turned up camshaft lobes with abnormal wear, along with finger followers that were damaged or missing entirely from their correct positions. Physical evidence consistent with the known wear pattern this engine family is known for. Later in the process, Armstrong also suspected that a previous repair to the engine had been carried out incorrectly, with the cam variators on one bank of cylinders installed out of their proper position, throwing off the internal timing. In other words, the engine wasn't a lost cause. It was a car that needed a proper, methodical rebuild rather than a full replacement, but it also wasn't a car with a clean, straightforward mechanical story. There were at least two separate issues layered on top of each other: the original valve train wear and a prior repair that hadn't been done correctly. This is where the story stops being a simple tale of corporate stinginess and becomes something more complicated. Modern Porsches log an enormous amount of data across multiple onboard control units: engine run hours, service history, diagnostic fault codes, and yes, mileage. When Porsche's official diagnostic tools are run on a car, they don't just read the number on the dashboard. They cross-reference it against everything else the car's computers have recorded. According to Armstrong's account, that cross-reference is exactly what triggered the rejection. The wear visible on the internal components didn't match what a car with the indicated mileage should have shown. Porsche suspected that a mileage blocker, an aftermarket device that intercepts the signal to the odometer and prevents mileage from accumulating on the display, even while the car continues to be driven, may have been fitted to the car at some point in its life. If true, this reframes the entire situation. Mileage blockers exist because higher mileage numbers can knock thousands of dollars off the resale value of an exotic car, and owners who use them are usually trying to protect resale value rather than admit to worry about engine wear. But a device like that also poisons any warranty claim built around mileage-based coverage, because the manufacturer has no reliable way of knowing how hard, or how far, the car has actually been driven. From a legal and contractual standpoint, no warranty provider, car manufacturer or otherwise, is obligated to honor a claim once there's credible evidence the underlying data has been tampered with. That's a very different story from a manufacturer abandoned a known defect to save money. It's closer to a manufacturer walked away from a car because it could no longer trust the car's own history. Whether the mileage blocker was fitted by the original owner, a previous owner further back, or someone else entirely is not something Armstrong could fully confirm from where he was sitting, but the suspicion alone was enough for Porsche's corporate systems to flag the vehicle and decline the claim. With the cause of the failure reasonably well understood, the rebuild itself became a matter of sourcing the right parts and executing a careful, methodical reassembly. Armstrong has said the parts needed to get the engine running again cost around £5,500, a relatively modest figure by the standards of exotic car repairs, especially set against the tens of thousands of dollars a full factory-authorized engine replacement would have cost. The rebuild process involved replacing the worn valve train components, correcting the camshaft timing and variator positions that had reportedly been installed incorrectly during an earlier repair, and painstakingly cleaning out the engine's oil passages to remove any leftover metal debris from the original wear damage. Leaving behind even small metal particles risks sending fresh contamination straight back through a newly rebuilt engine, so this kind of cleaning is tedious but non-negotiable. Once the engine was reassembled, retimed, and reinstalled, the moment of truth arrived. According to Armstrong, when the key was finally turned, the engine started without the wall of warning lights and fault codes you might expect from a car that had spent months sitting dead in a workshop. Oil pressure and coolant circulation checked out. The dashboard stayed clear. Getting the car running was one goal. Getting Porsche to acknowledge the repair was another entirely, and a much harder one. Rather than simply drive off into the sunset with a fixed car, Armstrong reportedly took the GT3 RS back to an official Porsche technician for the brand's rigorous 111-point inspection, the same kind of comprehensive check Porsche uses to evaluate a vehicle's condition before extending warranty coverage or certifying a used car. The results, by most accounts, were largely positive. The engine work held up under scrutiny. But it wasn't enough to immediately win back full warranty coverage. A handful of secondary concerns reportedly remained on the table, including items unrelated to the engine rebuild itself, such as wear on suspension components and brake pads. Porsche's stance, in other words, wasn't simply reversed the moment the engine ran cleanly. The process of rebuilding trust with a manufacturer that has already flagged a car for suspected mileage tampering is evidently slower and more cautious than fixing the mechanical fault itself. It's tempting to frame this story as a straightforward David and Goliath tale, a corporate giant abandoning its own flagship car rather than honor a warranty, and a scrappy independent mechanic proving them wrong. There's some truth in that framing. Porsche's finger-follower wear issue on these naturally aspirated flat-six engines is well documented within the enthusiast community, and it's fair to ask hard questions about how manufacturers handle known design weaknesses in halo products that cost more than most houses. But the mileage discrepancy complicates any clean moral verdict. If Porsche's diagnostic systems genuinely detected evidence that the car's true mileage didn't match its displayed mileage, then the company was arguably within its rights, and arguably obligated, from a liability standpoint, to decline the claim. No warranty, from any manufacturer in any industry, is designed to survive tampered odometer data. That's not a loophole. It's the entire point of a mileage-based warranty term. What this story really exposes isn't one villain but a structural weak point in how high-value used cars change hands. A single hidden device, fitted at some point in a car's history by someone who may not even be the seller Armstrong dealt with, was enough to strip a six-figure supercar of its factory backing and send it spiraling toward repossession. For buyers shopping in the exotic and collector car market, that's a genuinely useful cautionary tale. A clean-looking body and a low number on the dash tell you far less than a full, verified service and diagnostic history. Armstrong's rebuild ultimately did what these kinds of projects tend to do best. It turned a car that had been written off by conventional channels into a working, driving example again, using independent knowledge, careful diagnosis, and a willingness to do the unglamorous work of cleaning oil passages and retiming camshafts by hand. Whether or not Porsche ever fully restores factory warranty coverage on this specific car, the practical result speaks for itself. An engine that was supposedly a lost cause is back on the road. The bigger question this story raises isn't really about one YouTuber or one yellow Porsche. It's about how much trust buyers place in a mileage figure on a dashboard, and how easily that trust can be manipulated by a small, hidden piece of hardware wired into a car's electronics. As diagnostic technology inside modern performance cars grows more sophisticated, so too does a manufacturer's ability to catch that kind of manipulation, for better or worse, depending on which side of the warranty claim you happen to be standing on. For now, the speed yellow GT3 RS that once sat dead and blacklisted in a repossession lot is running again, its flat six spinning up toward that famous 9,000 revolutions per minute red line once more. Whether Porsche ever fully welcomes it back into the fold is a different story, one that, for now, remains unresolved. What do you think? Did Porsche have every right to walk away from this car, or should the known engine defect have overridden the mileage dispute? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the cars manufacturers would rather forget. Known finger follower and camshaft wear patterns. Specific figures and claims attributed to Matt Armstrong reflect his own public statements in his video content and are presented here as reported, not independently verified by Porsche or a third party.